Is the Star-Spangled Banner, our national anthem, actually a Masonic drinking song? Let's find out. Welcome to the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry channel. I'm Maynard Edwards, 33rd degree. Don't forget, subscribe and give us a thumbs up. It really does help us out a lot, so please go ahead and do that. I am at Fort McHenry, which is named for Brother James McHenry. James McHenry was one of our founding fathers, a signer of the Constitution, but we're not here to talk about Brother James McHenry today. Instead, we're here to talk about a guy who may have been a brother and the possibility that one of our most famous songs, our national anthem, in fact, might have been a Masonic drinking song. Francis Scott Key has been in the news lately, and the reason for this is behind me. Well, it used to be behind me. Back behind me, over my shoulder here from the shore of Fort McHenry, you could have clearly seen the Francis Scott Key Bridge. And it was about where that bridge was that Francis Scott Key was located when he saw the flag flying over Fort McHenry during the Battle of Baltimore in 1814, and he was inspired to write the words of our national anthem. Originally, the poem was called The Defense of Fort McHenry. It didn't become the Star-Spangled Banner until much, much later. It was set to music rather early on, but the tune itself was not entirely original. It was a borrowed tune. And as it turns out, that borrowed tune may in fact have been a Masonic drinking song. That is to say, it was used by Masons during festive occasions, and they may have been lifting a pint or two at that time. So to find out whether or not Francis Scott Key was a Mason and whether or not our national anthem is based on a Masonic drinking song, we sat down and talked to historian Chris Ruli, 32nd degree, KCCH.
He was involved in the War of 1812. He was helping American troops. He was spotting. He was doing a lot of reconnaissance work. He wasn't the one that actually got in trouble. It was his associate, Dr. William Beans. The British caught him because he was part of a team that detained British soldiers who were basically ransacking people's houses looking for food. And so the British and Admiral Cockburn, Francis Scott Key, an associate, basically go to Cockburn, and they have a dinner on one of the boats, and they're basically trying to plead to release this guy. They also know that there's going to be a bombardment happening. The British are attacking Fort McHenry, as you said. So what they do is they say, we will let him go, and you can go with him, but you will be stuck on this boat. They call it a truce ship, and they basically said, this ship is not a combatant. You'll stay on this ship until we tell you when you're allowed to depart. And so on this ship, Francis Scott Key is watching the attack, this bombardment of Fort McHenry. And so after a couple days, he notices the flag of the fort is still up. The story is he jots down, because he's also a writer and a poet, and he was just sort of struck by this moment in history. He jots down the Star-Spangled Banner. Well, a week after he's finished, he's allowed to leave. He finishes his poem. It's printed in the newspaper, and it starts to get a life of its own. And then eventually it becomes just as popular as the de facto Hail Columbia, which really was the American anthem at the time. Hail Columbia, happy land, hail ye heroes, heaven-born band. And then over time, during Warren G. Harding's administration, they make it the official national anthem.
So the tune itself we'll talk about in a minute, because the tune is borrowed, and having sung it many times, it is a challenge.
Yeah.
So we'll talk about where that comes from, but there is a question as to whether or not Francis Scott Key was a Freemason. I've seen conflicting things. Key a Mason? Not a Mason. I'm in the library, so I've got to be quiet. And look, I know not everybody is lucky enough to get to work in one of the best Masonic libraries in the world, but with the Scottish Rite bookstore, you can start building your own Masonic library at home right now. From critical Scottish Rite texts like A Bridge to Light and Morals and Dogma to those hard-to-find copies of Herodom from the Scottish Rite Research Society. The Scottish Rite bookstore has that book that you need in your Masonic book collection for your library at home. And right now, select copies of Herodom from the Scottish Rite Research Society are on sale for just $15. That's more than half off the cover price. And this book right here, Lodge of the Double-Headed Eagle, which is the definitive history of the Scottish Rite from 1801 forward, well, that's only $12.50 right now while supplies last. So check the links and make sure you get in and get those copies of Herodom for only $15 and Lodge of the Double-Headed Eagle for $12.50 while supplies last. Good. I was afraid I was going to get shushed. Key, a Mason? Not a Mason.
Right now, with what the evidence we have, I'm going to say no. But the case for him being a Mason is based on the fact that he was a leader in his community, the people around him were known Masons, and there are references, or some people would say homages to ritual in some of his writing. So we don't necessarily know if that means that he just heard the conversation or he was a Mason. The other side is maybe he wanted to make it as an homage, and so he included some references to the first degree, let's say. But again, you would think that everyone else around him, his social circle, research, known Masons would have commented on him being a Freemason. So that's where I take the sort of, we don't necessarily know if that's the case or not. So I make the argument right now he's not.
We can't be conclusive about it. And this is not unusual. There are a lot of guys who we say, well, could have been a Mason, but we don't have proof. This is where we have to file that for the time being.
Sure.
The song itself, and I'm not talking about the lyrics. Obviously, Key wrote the lyrics, but the tune, I hear, and I have no fact. I'm just one of those rumors that gets passed about.
Right.
Was a Masonic drinking song that might have been sung at a tavern after a meeting or something of that nature.
The poem gets published. He says something to the effect of, to the tune of Anacreon in Heaven. I was going through some records of old Georgetown families that live in Georgetown trying to find some other Masons. There was a woman that wrote a really good history of the people that lived in Georgetown when I was a younger woman. And so she referenced Francis Scott Key, because obviously he lived in Georgetown, and she mentions, by the way, as an aside, that song was an old Masonic drinking song. Now, the song itself likely, the songs get edited, get changed, they adapted, as you know, you're a musician yourselves. The tunes themselves, the musical components get reused and used and reused depending on, so it likely would have been a Masonic drinking song. That it also became or either before or after was this other song that had nothing to do with Masonry, nothing to do with drinking.
Who had gone in heaven where we sat in full glee, of the sons of harmony, said the fancied Sion, that he there inspired and matron would be, when his answer arrived from the jolly old Grecian.
I do know Anacreon in Heaven is also the song, the tune was also played when Lafayette came, and they did they wrote a Lafayette song based on that tune as well. So again, here's another example of people taking the melody but changing the verse.
It's interesting that if we have evidence that that song was used for Lafayette, that again, it goes into the circumstantial evidence that Key was a Mason if that was a song common to Masons at the time. And I'll give you a modern example that we often use at table lodges and specific ceremonies. There's two, in fact. Nearer My God to Thee. Masons use that frequently. Certainly, I wouldn't call it a Masonic song, but one that we use. And Auld Lang Syne. We use it, obviously, Robert Burns, who wrote Auld Lang Syne as a poem, been come to symbolize New Year's Eve. Masons use it at the end of table lodges and things because it's about remembering old friendships and making new ones. And so that's what you hope happens at a good meeting and a good table lodge. So, but most people wouldn't say, hey, that's a Masonic song. We sort of put our arms around it. So kind of the same thing here.
Yeah, I find it interesting that, she is saying when she was younger, she heard it because it was maybe her family member maybe her friends in her community, or maybe her father's friends were Masons, and so she heard that song. She goes, "Ah, that's a Masonic drinking song. That's where I heard that from." But eventually, it transformed into the national anthem. I also think it's really important to realize that we have these perceptions of this stuff was there from the beginning. Not really, over time. Does anyone know? Do you know the lyrics to "Hail Columbia"? That was for the first 100 up until 130 years.
Wow.
The national anthem. So things change.
To wrap things up, I've come to the Mount Olivet Cemetery in Frederick, Maryland, and behind me is the Francis Scott Key Memorial and Grave Site. Francis Scott Key and his wife are buried beneath the statue, and at the base of the statue are the words to the Star-Spangled Banner, of course. But as far as definitive answers, was Francis Scott Key a Mason? It looks like probably not. We don't have any definitive evidence that we can find. As for the other question, is our national anthem actually borrowed from a Masonic drinking song? Signs sure do point in that direction. So every time you take off your cap and put it over your heart at a ball game, or you stand to sing the national anthem anywhere, just know that our Masonic forefathers may have been singing that same tune with a few different words at a table lodge or other Masonic festivity. Thanks for watching. I'm Maynard Edwards, 33rd Degree. Don't forget, give us a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and if you think we got something wrong, we'd love to know. If you've got some research we don't know about, we'd love to know even more. So make sure you drop us a comment below. We'll catch you next time.